Section 11 of Orpheus with his Lute by W.M.L. Hutchinson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 2. Orpheus and Eurydice. Farewell to the forest. 9 years were come and gone since the child Orpheus spent his last night in the enchanted glade. Once more summer had robed the oak forest in her green and gold, and once more the woodmen were returning from the yearly festival they kept with their neighbors of the village. Up the steep woodland paths they came, a merry company, and in the midst of them walked a tall, fair lad holding a lute. His yellow hair was crowned with laurel. By the admiring court his companions paid to him, it seemed that garland was a badge of victory, and he himself one whose good success was a matter for pride to them all. But none eyed the lad so proudly and so fondly as a gray-headed man, bent with years and toil, who leaned upon his arm. "How happy is Oiagros," cried a woodman, looking on these two, "who has seen his son bear off the prize today from the best minstrels in the land." Even so it was. There had been that year a new thing at the midsummer feast, a contest of song, and it was Orpheus whose first long-forgotten lay had so ill-pleased the woodmen, to whom prize and victor's wreath had fallen amid their joyous acclaims. The prize was the fair lute of 7 strings, which he now carried, and this was how it came to be won. A stranger, handsome and young, visited the village in the springtime, and gave himself out for a merchant, grown rich in trafficking with Apollo's pilgrims at Delphi. He spoke much of the famous trials of minstrelsy that were held there, and said, would the folk of the village hold such a trial at their festival, they should not want for a prize worthy the winning. So saying, he showed them a lute of silver and ivory, cunningly fashioned, a treasure for a king. At the sight whereof they gladly promised to hold that trial, and straightway sent news of it through all the countryside. But they owned that one thing troubled them. There was not a man among them all who had skill of minstrelsy enough to be judge in such a contest. "Care not for that," said the stranger. "I shall be here, and by those who know me I am reckoned no mean judge of that art." Thus, when the day came, all the singers and harpers of the regions round about were gathered together, and each in turn gave proof of his skill. Now Orpheus stood in the throng with the rest of the woodmen, and some of them urged him to try his fortune, for of late they had become much enamored of his singing. Such marvelous tales could he chant to a rude harp he had framed for himself. He hung back and said, "I have not brought harp or lute like these others." But the stranger overheard him and cried, "Take the lute that is set for prize, young minstrel, for we will hear you also." So Orpheus took it, and it was as a familiar thing in his hands. And the song he sang was of Apollo, how he came an infant to Delphi. When he ceased, the stranger smiled on him and said, "Keep my lute, for you have won it, and wear this laurel crown for a token that you are victor in my contest." Then all the folks shouted a great applause, and the friends of Orpheus pressed round him to clasp him by the hand. He turned to thank the stranger, but he had already mingled with the crowd, and it seemed that he soon quitted the village, for Orpheus sought him in vain. That evening, when the feast was done that Oiagros made for his neighbors, and father and son sat alone together in their hut, Orpheus took up the lute and began to look at it more narrowly by the light of their clay lamp. There were names wrought in small clear characters of gold upon its ivory scroll-work, 9 well-remembered names that he read with a beating heart. Others then, it seemed, must know his ladies of the well. Now he might surely learn more of them without betraying their trust. "Father," he said, "what names are these wrought upon my lute?" Oiagros looked long on the golden script, and his sunburnt face grew pale. "Have you ever heard," he said slowly, "the name of your mother?" "No, father," answered the lad, wondering. "You have never spoken it in my hearing." "It is written here," said Oiagros, "and by that token I know the time has come for me to speak it at last." Thoughts of bewildering sweetness rushed over Orpheus like a flood. "Oh," cried he, "I know it! It is Calliope!" Then, as his father looked at him with mute surprise, "Ask me not how I know," he faltered. "I feel that if one of the 9 be indeed my mother, it must be she. But how is it possible? My mother, has she not long been dead? Was I not her true child, nor yours? Ah, what does all this mean?" "My son," said Oiagros, "for true son of mine you are. Listen to me, and you shall hear a story that I have waited long to tell. There was a woodman of this forest who in his youth was even such as yourself, a dreamer of dreams and a haunter of solitary places, but one who lacked your gift to utter the fair thoughts that came to him there. Now he lived in his hut alone, until one stormy night a stranger maiden knocked at his door, asking for shelter. He took her in, and gave her of his supper, and they sat all night long beside the fire, for the maiden recounted the most entrancing stories, and she had a voice that would have wiled the bird off the tree. Presently she began to talk of himself and his doings as though she had known him his life long. Nay, she told him things none knew but he, so that he saw she was a fay. Then the woodman was afraid, but for all that, when morning came, he could not bear to lose her company, and he asked her to stay with him and be his wife. And the fay said, "If you are content to have me to wife for a year and a day, it shall be so. But after that I must go back to my sisters in the forest, and you will see me no more." Well content was the woodman, for he thought, "A year is a long while for a man to live happy," and so they were wedded. But the months of that year passed like days, and its days like hours, and short enough it seemed to the woodman ere it had fleeted away. Not till it was ended did the fay tell him her name. Then he knew her for one of the 9 immortal sisters, who were called the Muses. He had heard from wandering bards the praises of those ladies of song, who witch the high gods with melody when they chant to Apollo's harping at the celestial feast. Shepherds, too, had told him strange tales of a secret glade in the forest that the Muses haunted of moonlight nights. Thither, they said, a lamb of the flocks sometimes strayed, and was never seen again, but great was ever the luck of him who thus lost a weanling from his fold. Ay, and not seldom the shepherds had heard the singing of the Muses sound faint and sweet in the far woods at midnight, but none had ever seen them. The only mortal who ever looked upon their loveliness face to face was this poor woodman. Now, when he knew his bride was one of that immortal sisterhood, he saw how vain was any hope that she could be won to abide with him. She whose eternal summer could not fade, how could she endure a mate whose youth must wither like the grass and his years pass away like a shadow? As well might he plead with a star that had strayed earthward but for a moment, to forget the heavens and shine under his lowly roof. The hour came when they parted. With what farewells his heart remembers, but I leave unsaid. I think the woodman could not have tarried in the world that had darkened around him, save for one thing. He was not left quite alone. She who was lost to him had given a little babe into his keeping, and at first he cherished it for her sake, but the tiny golden-headed thing grew dearer and dearer to the lonely man. and for many a year now all his hope and comfort has been in that beloved son. Have I made the story plain to you, my child?" "Father," said Orpheus, his eyes filling with tears, "I know now why you have been always sad, and why you could never speak to me of my mother. Only I do not understand how this lute could be a token to you that I was to hear these things tonight." "I should have told you," said Oiagros, "that when the muse departed, she charged the woodman to keep silence until their child should bring him her name written in gold upon an ivory scroll, and then to tell him all. And she said that in the same hour he should learn how she had watched over the boy with a mother's love." Then Orpheus knew that he too might speak at last, and he told his father all that had befallen him in the enchanted glade, from the day when he first sang to the woodmen and fled away heartbroken at their bitter mockery. But Oiagros could recall nothing of that, because the spell of the water of forgetfulness was still upon him. "I remember," he said, "how you began to sing to us when we were come home from the midsummer feast, where we heard a right good minstrel. That was your 9th birthday. I had taken you to the festival for the first time. But I forget what happened after you sang, dear lad, for as I listened, it seemed I heard the very tones of your mother's voice, and that you looked at me with her eyes." Much more had Oiagros and his son to say to each other that night, and they talked long and late. When Orpheus slept at last in his bed of leaves, his father was still sitting beside the embers of the hearth, revolving many memories. But at early morn the lad was awakened by a loud, joyous cry. He started up and saw that he was alone in the hut. The cry came again through the open door. "Calliope! Calliope!" Then silence. A sudden chill of dread crept to his heart, and he stole forth, vaguely aware that some unknown presence waited for him in the gray dawn. It was the gentle presence of death. Oiagros lay white and still on the dewy grass before his threshold, his eyes closed, a smile of utter peace on his worn face. In that sight the son who so loved him could feel there was nothing for tears. And thus it was, with no bitterness of grief, that Orpheus stood, not many nights thereafter, by the grave in a mossy dell where the woodmen had laid their comrade. Rather could he have found it in his heart to rejoice while he thought on that happy passing of a weary soul. But for very loneliness he could not stay in his empty home, and he was minded to try his fortunes further than the forest. Tomorrow he would set forth into the world, a wandering minstrel, and now he came to say a last farewell and make the wonted offering at his father's tomb. With reverent hand he laid a curling lock of his fair hair on the flower-strewn mound, and murmured the words of pious custom. "I greet thee, my father, I greet thee. Light lie the earth on this place of thy rest, and well may it be with thee in thy long home. Greeting and farewell, greeting and farewell." Was it the mountain echo that repeated the last words? No leaf was stirring in the moonlit woods, yet there came a sighing through the tall poplars that edged the vale, and then near voices chanted the refrain, "Greeting and farewell, greeting to thee, O sleeper, and fare thee well." Orpheus turned and saw the 9 sisters coming towards him with hands full of lilies and asphodel and eyes bent upon the ground. 3 times they slowly circled the grave from left to right, scattering their flowers the while, and singing plaintively and low. The words he heard not, save when they bade sweet peace be to the mortal whose earthly toil was done. This ended, they glided silently away, and each, as she passed Orpheus, gave him a gracious look of remembrance. But Calliope lingered behind the rest, as once so long ago, and taking him by the hand, led him gently from the dell. "Come," she said, "my child, the night wears on apace, and you have need of rest before the morrow's journey. I will bring you on your way homeward, and as we go you shall tell me somewhat of your hopes and purpose in setting forth to other lands." Now it had seemed to Orpheus that if ever he saw this wondrous mother of his again, he must feel such awe and strangeness in her presence as would keep him tongue-tied. But at the sound of her tender voice and the touch of her hand, his misgivings vanished. It was to him as though they had been parted but a day, and he were still the child whom she had lulled to sleep in her loving arms. So while they went along, he unburdened all his heart to the great Muse as freely as when she had soothed his first childish grief. He told her why he was eager to be gone, and how he longed to see the fair southern lands of which he had heard, and how, now that there was none to miss him in the forest, he would wander from city to city with his lute, like the minstrel he had envied of old, singing those marvels of the ancient ages which he had learned from the Nine. For by their lessoning, he said, he had already won favor and fame among his own people, and being so taught, he hoped ere long to sing the perfect song, as Urania had foretold. As the youth spoke of this hope, his cheek flushed and his blue eyes grew wistful. He said in a lower tone, "It is of that I dream, and for that I live." "My Orpheus," said Calliope, "if my sisters and I could teach you to sing that song, you should not have left us when you did, nor would I now bid you depart once more. But not all the lore of all the Muses can avail you in this. Said I not long ago that you must turn some day to other teachers?" "Who are they, mother?" said Orpheus, "and how may I find them in the lands whither I go?" "Fear not to miss them," answered the Muse, "for it is they who will find you. As for who they are, you will know full soon. Nay, the first of those great masters of song awaits you even now. Go hence, then, with good hope, my well-beloved, and the fates send you your heart's desire. Here I bid you farewell, for see, yonder is the hut, and that threshold I crossed not again." With that she embraced her son tenderly and was gone. And in the morning Orpheus took his lute and went his way into the world beyond the forest. End of Farewell to the Forest. Read by Mark Harrington, Framingham, Massachusetts.